Superstorms, soaring temperatures, record-breaking droughts. Tonight, understanding climate change, how the lack of snow in California's high Sierras means bad harvests for farmers.
No water, no money.
How changing oceans are changing business.
I've got 85 employees that rely on me.
And how everything we know may never be the same.
A house with running water has a privilege now.
Climate SOS.
I'm Jake Ward in Yosemite National Park. This is the first stop on a journey that'll show you the impact of a warming climate. Here's why scientists and leaders from 195 nations across the globe adopted an agreement to fight climate change and slow global warming. More than 97% of working scientists agree that the climate is warming and that it's humanity's fault. The consensus on climate change is so strong that researchers are in fact moving on to the costs and dangers of the problem. A recent UC Berkeley and Stanford study identified a direct relationship between rising temperatures and economic output. Just as a worker has to slow down in the heat, so do whole countries. The study predicts that by the end of the century, unmitigated climate change will make 77% of countries poorer in per capita terms. Total global economic output will drop by a whopping 20%. And we don't have to wait until 2100. A recent Citigroup study concluded that as early as 2060, climate change will cost the world $44 trillion. The study predicts that the US and China, with hotter climates than other rich countries, will suffer disproportionate harm. Russia will do better, and Northern Europe could even benefit as it warms up. In California, which is experiencing one of its worst droughts in history, the water shortage has caused the governor to declare a state of emergency. When there isn't enough rain, snow makes up the difference. Snow is like a long-term water storage system. And I'm about to show you how this snow winds up in a glass of water. The snow falls in the Sierra Nevadas, California's highest mountains. As winter warms to spring, the snow melts and the water makes a slow descent into the Central Valley, where roughly half of America's fruits and vegetables are grown. Eventually, that water makes its way into the drinking supply of most of California's population. Snow is the stuff of life in this state and around the world. There are 32 regions across the globe that depend on a dense snowpack as their main source of water. Decreased snowmelt could deprive as many as 1 billion people of water. Already, drought has driven millions of Syrians into extreme poverty, fanning the flames of civil war. In California, America's most powerful and populous state, the lack of snowfall has caused devastation. If this continues, it's not clear how anything here, the economy, the ecosystem, America's food supply, can adapt. A journey through California's problems is a journey through the world's. The first to suffer? Trees. California is home to the largest, most famous trees on Earth, giant sequoias. And this summer, scientists began to notice that those trees were feeling the effects of thirst.
They were losing their older needles, their older leaves, in amounts that I had never seen before.
Giant sequoias like this are very, very special. They're the largest organisms on Earth, and they are ancient. But after 4 years of drought and the warming effects of climate change, researchers are now worried about their future. At roughly 2,500 years old, this one predates Christianity and Islam. But more importantly for today is how tall it is. It's over 75 meters, more than 240 feet tall. Scientists are going to go up in it today to try and take some water samples, and God help me, I'm going to follow them. Anthony Ambrose leads a team from Berkeley. He climbs to the very top of these trees to test them for signs of stress. He's been doing this kind of thing for about 20 years. This is my first time. And the climb taught me a new respect, not just for the scientists, but for the tree itself. You can feel the weight of history in the weight of this tree, so it's extraordinary to be here. Warmer temperatures mean the trees need enormous amounts of water.
A typical giant sequoia tree of this size might use anywhere between 500 and 800 gallons of water in a single summer day.
Trouble is, the Sierra snowpack, which provides water to trees here throughout the summer as it melts, is now at a 500-year low.
Sugar pine seems to be suffering a lot of mortality that we've seen. Ponderosa pine as well. Incense cedar has been dying back at a rate that people in the park have never seen before.
That was by far the scariest thing I've ever done. I've never felt so insignificant. This may be the last time that scientists climb these trees. Part of this project is to test the accuracy of the Carnegie Airborne Observatory, which is conducting flyover observations of whole forests at once.
5 centimeters?
Typically in the past we've missed most of the forest and tried to make an inference about the forest from samples from a few trees. And with the advent of imaging spectroscopy and airborne remote sensing, this has enabled us to collect data over enormous spatial scales that wouldn't have been possible in the past.
The sequoias, which have survived droughts for thousands of years, are surviving this so far. But the team points out that the combination of drought and rising temperatures is unprecedented.
We're in the 4th year of this severe drought. They still seem to be holding up pretty well. If we had another year as severe as this one, I'd say all bets are off.
This is one of many waterways fed by snow. If that snow can't provide enough water, and as you can see here, this one is incredibly low, then California is forced to rely on groundwater, ancient aquifers deep underground. Already, farmers in the Central Valley, below where I'm standing, all the way to the ocean, are drilling deep into that water supply. If that groundwater supply runs out and snow and rain can't make up the difference, then suddenly the nation's largest supply of fruits and vegetables is under threat, as Melissa Chan explains.
The Wood family has farmed this land for 4 generations, first growing cotton, these days garlic, alfalfa, and almonds on 1,900 acres, half of which lies fallow this year because of the drought.
I'm tired. I'm not 20 years old anymore, and you wonder how long you can continue to expend that kind of energy and not get what you consider to be an appropriate return.
For farms across the state, the 4th year of drought has become a make-or-break year. California produces half the country's fruits and vegetables, and agriculture's lifeline is here, the California Aqueduct. It cuts through Mike Wood's property in 2 different places, and frustratingly, he can't use a drop of it. The drought has forced the government to restrict water allocations, and Wood was told 0. He's had to go out and buy his water from other sources at a premium.
The problem is that as this drought continues, the availability of alternate sources, pardon the pun, is drying up because they're just, at any price, there's just no availability.
Or pardon the pun, your rainy day fund is going to dry up.
The rainy day fund has been gone now for about 6 months.
One report estimates that more than 500,000 acres will be left unplanted this year, up 25% from last year, resulting in the loss of some 18,000 jobs and $2.7 billion for the state. Mendota, California. This time last year, unemployment hit 40% in already depressed town, devastated by the drought's impact. We spoke to one out-of-work man who did not wish to be identified.
Yes, there are a lot of people. One week they go to work, and the next week they don't. It isn't the same as before, when there was more work, and it's because of the water situation.
Vince DiMaggio was tasked with turning things around as the new city manager. He celebrates the fact unemployment has dropped to 27%.
20% or more is still a tremendous number.
Yeah, it is. It's 1 out of 5 people, and but you have to realize that I think in almost every small city and town in this country that's isolated from a major urban center, they're never going to have unemployment of 5.5%.
This whole area depends pretty much about 90% on agriculture. I mean, if there's no ag, there's no life here, pretty much. I've seen people that I used to see getting up every day for work in food lines, so you know it's rough.
Part of the state's emergency drought relief includes more food assistance. Mendota's food bank used to take place once a month. Now it happens almost every week. So here's what's really interesting about what's being handed out here. You have tomato sauce, green beans. These are things that are grown in California, and you have farm workers who pick them fresh, but now unemployed farm hands are in line because they need food, and they're getting this canned. Rosa Mejia picked cantaloupes for decades, until the worst drought in a century took away the only thing she really knows how to do.
No water, no job. No job, no food. No water, no money.
The irony of California's Central Valley, the breadbasket of the nation, and where some of the state's hungriest residents live. Hand in hand, one has served the other for years, so much more painfully pronounced by this endless drought. Melissa Chan, Al Jazeera, Mendota, California.
This is California's Central Valley, one of the most productive growing regions in the world. But it's getting harder and harder to get water to fields like these. And that's true in many other places as well. Across the Southwest and the Great Plains, water shortages are making agriculture harder. So what would happen if this nation, or any nation in the world, lost its traditional food-growing regions? Could we somehow get our food from the oceans instead? That story is coming up. Welcome back to our journey through the American West to show you the effects of climate change around the world. Here in California's Central Valley, where I am now, they grow a huge amount of the fruits and vegetables for the United States. What would happen if climate change caused those crops to fail, if suddenly we could not provide that food from the land? Could we somehow get what we needed from the ocean instead? Alan SCHAUFFLER reports from the Pacific Northwest.
3 million pounds a year grown, shucked, and sold at Goose Point Oysters on Washington's Willapa Bay. Kathleen NISBET MONCEY is a young COO trying to grow a business in a time when just growing oysters themselves is a challenge due to the changing chemical composition of West Coast waters.
It's changed the way we do business entirely. We have a whole new business now because of ocean acidification.
The pH level, the measurement of acidity, varies across the world's oceans. But researchers at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration say on average the ocean is 30% more corrosive now than it was before the Industrial Revolution in the mid-1700s.
There hasn't really been a time in history that we can observe, that we can detect, where the CO2 hasn't changed this fast.
So we really don't know what's coming.
We don't know exactly.
We do know more CO2 means more acidic water, and we know the effects are dramatic on the west coast of North and South America, where seasonal winds and currents cause upwelling. Surface water moves and is replaced by colder, deeper water, which stores carbon dioxide in higher concentration. The naturally occurring periods of corrosiveness now being made worse by centuries of man-made CO2 trapped in the water.
A lot of the species that live in the ocean are sensitive to these changes in pH, particularly things that make shells.
Things like crabs, clams, and of course, oysters.
We were going to slowly probably suffer and die, or we were going to come up with another solution so that our company could be successful in the future.
About 8 years ago, seedling oysters started dying. Research linked that directly to high acidity. Second-generation oyster farmer Kathleen NISBET MONCEY sees more than just farming and oysters at risk.
I mean, I've got 85 employees that rely on me. We're a huge part of the community that we're in. If we're not going to adapt to the change that's happening here, then we're out of business.
So Goose Point built a new hatchery in Hawaii, where a saltwater well provides consistent, predictable water conditions. Seedling oysters are shipped in by air.
You can fit about 15 million oyster larvae in the palm of your hand.
Then planted and grown locally. Other West Coast growers have found less drastic ways to manage hatchery water quality and control acid levels. Scientists like McElhaney say the oyster scare is likely just the beginning. Studies show tiny sea creatures like this pteropod are vulnerable to acidification. Etched, damaged shells could weaken the species, with consequences further up the food chain.
Those effects kind of ripple through the whole food web, and they can affect, ultimately the salmon that we care about eating and the orcas that eat the salmon. And so, all of these things are connected.
Researchers say we humans have done this to the world's oceans. That leaves one major question unanswered right now. Is there any realistic way we can undo it?
Reducing carbon emissions would help, say McElhaney and many others, but even with significant reductions, it could take centuries, even longer, to get back to the ocean chemistry of 250 years ago.
You know, we shouldn't leave the impression at all that the ocean is going to be a sterile place. There are still going to be a lot of things living in the ocean. The concern is that the things that increase are not the things that are kind of important to people.
I feel that it's going to be a really bumpy ride.
We'll have to learn to live with changing oceans. Alan SCHAUFFLER, Al Jazeera, on the oyster beds of Willapa Bay, Washington.
In a place as lush as this farm in the Central Valley, the effects of climate change are not immediately obvious. Maybe the food is getting a little more expensive or the summers are a bit hotter. But in communities around the world, people are literally running out of water. Next, we're going to take you to a community in the richest state of the world's richest nation to show you what life is like when the water runs out. That's next. Welcome back to our look at climate change and its impact on the American West and on the world. Snowmelt here in California is not just a source of water for agriculture, it's also drinking water. By the time it reaches this place, the Sacramento Delta, on its journey to the Pacific coast, it has become a source of water for literally millions of people in both northern and southern California. But right now, just a few hundred miles south of here, there are towns that have run out of water completely. Jennifer London reports from one community that simply cannot afford to dig for the water it needs.
These people are out of water. They just recently went out of water.
If water is life, then the small community of East Porterville is dying. Turn on the tap in J.C. Coates' bathroom.
How are you living like this? Is this any way to live?
No.
No.
No, it's not, but what are you gonna do?
In Jane Tapia's kitchen.
We don't have water for washing clothes, the dishes, or bathing.
Down the street, Deborah Madrigal ran out in July.
So this is one of the extreme measures you've had to take to try and get water into the house by
Yes.
putting this tank up in this tree?
My husband has another tank like that in his truck. He fills it up every day.
More than half of East Porterville's 7,500 residents have been without running water for months and in some cases years. With no central water system, the majority of homes here rely on private wells. As the state's historic drought drags on, those wells have run dry. Yolanda Serrato's family ran out of water 18 months ago.
It's been really hard. We had to make a lot of changes.
What are some of the changes you've had to make?
First thing, we have to bathe with a bucket of water.
Did you ever think you'd be living like this?
Oh, no. Even though I used to live like this in Mexico, I never thought we were gonna live again this right now.
Most residents can't afford to drill new, deeper wells, so Tulare County has devised a temporary solution, delivering bottled water and filling up these large above-ground tanks.
For residents here, Tuesdays have become incredibly important. That's when the weekly water deliveries arrive. But on this street, Tuesday came and went and no water, which means the water that's left in this tank, and you can see the level here, it's pretty low. This little amount of water will have to last the family for who knows how long. Andrew, do you think the county should have stepped in earlier and helped out residents before it's gotten to this point?
Are things moving as fast as we'd like them to? No, unfortunately. Largely what it comes down to is a drought is not a traditional type of disaster. Normally when you think of hundreds or thousands of homes impacted, you're thinking about things like earthquakes and wildfires and floods, very visible things. Drought is really, it's impacting people in their homes. So we don't have any regulatory oversight. We're having a real challenge there of adapting things as we go that were never designed to deal with this type of ongoing, slow-moving disaster.
It's just so unimaginable because you think, you see a house collapse or somebody float away and you go, that's really a disaster, but this is kind of a silent disaster.
For the past 15 months, longtime resident Donna Johnson has been going door to door.
Have you got barrels to put water in?
Yeah. Delivering water to her neighbors.
Makes me think of, how people can be the forgotten people. We look at other countries and we go, oh my God, Africa. But then when it hits home, it's even worse. And the thing to me was some of the people just didn't have a voice. They didn't know where to turn.
Yolanda, do you think it's acceptable that you and your neighbors here in East Porterville are having to live with no running water?
No, it's not acceptable. It's not. Because I thought to have running water in your house, it was a human right. But now I can see it's not. I can see this like a house with running water has a privilege now.
As residents struggle to survive without running water, more and more Californians are likely to find their taps dry, with solutions hard to come by in a state where water becomes more scarce every day. Jennifer London, Al Jazeera, East Porterville, California.
This is California's Golden Gate. It's the stunning end of the state's largest water system. Most of what you've seen so far drains in some way to this point. Now, the place looks very healthy. It looks like it gets plenty of water, right? Well, all of that turns out to be an illusion. That's what I learned on this story. This place, like so many places around the world, depends on snow and rain to stay alive. The most important takeaway for me? Understanding just how fragile the world's water supply is. High in the Sierras, the snow isn't just beautiful, it's an essential ingredient of our survival on Earth. It waters our crops, it quenches our thirst, it helps keep our oceans viable.
You'll have anywhere from 25 to 35 oysters per shell.
We can't just dig for new water, but we can cut down our carbon emissions and slow climate change down. Alternate energy sources and new ways of holding on to that energy get us closer to kicking carbon out of our power production. But technology alone cannot solve this problem. Each of us has to change the way we live. We can buy fewer things, which cuts out the energy required to make them. We can cut back on meat production, which contributes more emissions than cars do by some estimates. And if we change the way we commute, like choosing a bicycle over a car, a new study shows we can keep greenhouse gas emissions close to 2010 levels for decades. We're talking here about reinventing how we live on Earth. Humans have the power to limit climate change. The difficulty is in understanding that the longer we wait to do so, the harder it's going to become, and that the comforts we take for granted are all going to go away if we don't make a change of our own right now. Jake Ward, Al Jazeera, at California's Golden Gate.